I want to tell you about two little rearrangements that we've made. They're actually very big rearrangements. By using these devices as the spaces where students do their work. So what we're used to doing with these devices already is we download games, we download movies, we consume things. We don't make things on these devices much, okay? But if we want the kids to be actively putting things in there, not just consuming things but making things, here are two things we can do. One is we built this piece of software called Scholar, and I gather that Eugenia is going to use it with students in the class here. So, a traditional classroom discussion is like this. I say something and I ask you a question, and somebody over there puts up their hand and they try and guess the answer that I'm expecting. That's what you try to do. You try to read what's in the teacher's head, and only one person can answer at a time. You over there answer and everyone else listens. Okay, in the age of Facebook and Twitter, everyone's speaking together. So what we've built is a space here which is like a classroom discussion space where a topic gets begun and everybody is answering at the same time and everybody's seeing everyone else's answer at the same time and they start talking with each other. So a traditional classroom has low levels of engagement because while you are answering that question, you were all just listening and your mind might have wandered. But if you're actually all expected to engage and you can all see everybody else engaging, that's a very big shift in what technically is called classroom discourse. Now, classrooms are spaces of discourse. So, initiation, response, evaluation. That's theoretically what's going on in traditional classroom discourse. I initiate something, you respond, I evaluate. So what we're doing, and that's called IRE, technically that's the traditional form of classroom discourse. We can change that in a very big way if we move to a technology like Twitter and like Facebook. And that's what we've built. A second move. I'm just giving these examples. Let's say, historically, I wanted you to learn about volcanoes. Okay? And what I said is, turn to chapter 7, and chapter 7 in your textbook is about volcanoes. I'm going to give you a little lecture about volcanoes, but chapter 7 condenses a whole lot of information about volcanoes, and then at the end of the week or at the end of the semester, I'm going to give you a test. I'm going to say, lava is A, such and such, B, this, D, that, and you give the answer, and it shows what you've remembered. Okay, so essentially, the underlying theory of learning is about memory. Okay, and it's about individual memory. You haven't remembered so well, so you get a low score. You've remembered very well, you get a high score, and we're comparing you as individuals. Okay, I want to tell you another way to do volcanoes, which we also have in this space. So the first space, which is the classroom discussion space, is called community. You'll see it. The second space that I'm talking about now is called creator. So instead of you being a knowledge consumer, I'm reading about volcanoes and remembering what I've been told, you become a knowledge creator. So what you do is you go out on the web, and you know what? There are volcanoes at the bottom of the sea. There are volcanoes of this shape, but there are also volcanoes in Australia, where we come from, which just run along the ground like a river. Okay? Volcanoes are very different. So what I do is I go to Wikipedia, I look up on the web, I find tourist sites which describe Mount Vesuvius, and what I'm going to do, instead of reading the chapter about volcanoes, I am going to write a chapter about volcanoes. Instead of me consuming knowledge I've been given, I'm going to make this knowledge because it's all there, it's on the web, I can find it. And you're going to do about Mount Vesuvius, and they've just discovered under the ocean near Japan the biggest volcano they've ever found, which is at the bottom of the sea, and you're going to write about that because you're interested in that. You chose to write about that. And someone else who's from Australia, Mary's from Australia, she's going to write about these Australian volcanoes which go along the ground like a river, and as the lava comes out the end, they leave these big tunnels. But there's something common about volcanoes, even though they're all very different, but we're all going to be knowledge producers. Now, the next thing we're going to do is when I did my volcanoes test, I handed it in, the teacher gave me a mark. But in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to do peer review of each other's pieces of work. And when I wrote about Vesuvius, but when I read your one about this big volcano under the sea in Japan, it's incredibly interesting. But look, you've left out some important concepts about the Earth's core and how this happens and whatever, because we're interested in you being a scientist. You're going to be like a scientist, because you're presenting knowledge the way a scientist would. And what I do is, I don't know, you wrote it actually, it's anonymous perhaps, and I'm going to give you a whole lot of feedback. The teachers created assessment rubrics for the students to review each other's work, where, what were the scientific concepts? Well, you've got to include lava, you've got to include the Earth's crust, you've got to include a whole lot of geomorphic things and whatever. Did you provide empirical evidence which illustrated those concepts? Like, you might have put images in your text, or you might have put videos in your text. You know, there are lots of videos of this stuff working, and in the modern day, because it's the internet, you can actually put a little YouTube video, you can embed that. And what I do is then I give you useful feedback along the way. So I, as the student, am assessing other students. So what I'm doing is I am giving feedback to other students, but I'm actually doing exactly what somebody at a test would do, which is give you feedback on your work. And that actually, by the way, improves your work. So in other words, your work is not just your own work, it's the work which you've done through Mary's word that she used for collaboration. You've been a collaborator, and your work is really good because the other students around you have helped you make it better. And then at the end, you have this beautiful project you've written. It's a web page, it comes out, it's got videos in it, and it goes onto your personal portfolio, which can be on the web, you can show your parents. So instead of just handing in the work and nobody ever sees it ever again, it becomes something which is part of your web page, which you can be very proud of. So what I wanted to do with those two little examples, the example of classroom discourse and the example of writing about, doing a project about volcanoes, is say, look, with these devices, the devices themselves are they're just machines, but we can actually use those as a way to build much more engaging learning environments, and most importantly, they're environments where instead of us just remembering things as knowledge consumers, we become part of the 21st century where we are active knowledge producers. That's a big change. So I thought what I'd do... So the teacher, Mary wants to mention this, the teacher still has a very, very important role, but the role of the teacher, as Mary said, is to build the scaffold. So the rubric which says to write a good, it might be a geography report about volcanoes, or it might be a geology science report. You know, what are the aspects of a good geological description? What are the aspects of an effective analysis of a geographical feature? So the rubric is the scaffold. So it's not just me giving you, oh wow, that's great, feedback. It's actually using knowledge criteria as the filter in these peer-to-peer relationships, as the way in which we structure. So we've got all the students in the class all assessing each other at the same time, but the ways in which the students give each other feedback has been very carefully arranged by the teacher, and that's an important part of it. So anyhow, sorry if I ended up, does that make a bit of sense, even if my English was a bit fast and a bit of an Australian accent, which you might be used to?
Thank you, Bill. Ethan,